Tryon hadn't really caught on yet. With the coming of the railroad in 1877, when people had a way to get here, then the people started coming and staying. People came for several reasons. There was a company called the Land Speculation Company that were real estate developers. See, that's nothing new. That started a long time ago, and they advertised heavily for people to come here and buy property. Also, Asheville had been a center for the treatment of tuberculosis. There were sanitariums there. And a lot of people who came there for their health decided it was a little too cool, so they gradually came on down the mountain and ended up in Tryon. A lot of people came to Tryon for their health, that particularly with tuberculosis. So that's one way, and then of course two ways that people heard about it and came, and a lot of it, of course, by word of mouth. There had been people come up from the low country of South Carolina to Flat Rock, Hendersonville for the summer when it was too hot down in South Carolina. Some people came down here from the north because it was too cold up there. And a lot of them came just for the season but ended up staying or coming back to retire. So that's nothing new here either. That's been going on for a long time. Because people came here to visit, a lot of hotels and inns and boarding houses sprung up. One of the oldest ones was the McAvoy House, which is now Mimosa Inn, and then Oak Hall Hotel, which is now where the Oak Hall condominiums are. I'm going to start. When I was in high school, the Betty Sturgis shop in Tryon, my mother and my grandmother worked there. It was located beside McCall's dentist office at that time. And Betty's husband, Stanislaus Czechwatensky, was a bridge master, and he held tournaments at the Oak Hall Hotel. On Friday, Betty would have a luncheon and fashion show, and I used to get out of high school to go model for that. And then on Saturday night, the finals of the bridge tournament, Sarah McDonald would help with the scoring. And then she asked me to help her. And so I would go over there to Oak Hall on Saturday night, and I'd pick up the tallies and sort of learn how to put them on the board, but they had to check behind me. But here's at 8 o'clock, no matter what was going on at the tournament, Sarah and I went down the hall, went in one of the parlors and watched Gunsmoke. Okay, who would like to start with some sort of something about one of the inns or boarding houses that you remember?
Jim will tell you about bridge tuners at Oak Hall.
Betty and Stan that you mentioned, oh, what a wonderful couple. Stan was, as we understand it, was a Polish prince. And so he arrived here as Polish prince, and his wife was an American woman, and he was Prince Czechwatensky, and she was Princess Czechwatensky. Later on, I think, when they parted company, Stan dropped the prince, and he married Betty. Now, Betty and Stan, they did the bridge here, and we had tournaments at Oak Hall Hotel, and we had them at other places. They had a wonderful way of calling people and saying, so-and-so is just anxious to play bridge with you. And then they'd call the other person, so-and-so is just anxious to play bridge with you. And so they'd make partnerships that way. I would say that Betty and Stan did the bridge for a good number of years, 20 years or so here, and Sally Jo Carter has continued in the way that they did, and just done a marvelous job here. And of course, many of the tournaments were up at Oak Hall Hotel. I remember the first big tournament we had here, the prizes was a Tryon horse, a small Tryon horse. Now, I remember a visitor coming in, and he said, I am accustomed to getting trophies for winning bridge tournaments. I don't want one of those donkeys for my prize.
I might add that Stan represented Poland on the Davis Cup team before he came over here, which most people didn't know. Where the Tryon Town Hall is now was Hotel Tryon and later Buckingham Inn, and it was destroyed by a fire. I don't know the year, but it was rebuilt.
I watched the fire.
Yeah, when there was a fire in Tryon, everybody watched it. That was the biggest fire. This is away from the subject. The biggest fire I remember is the Tryon toy makers had a place right along the railroad track, not too far from where the depot is, and where they made toys and shipped them, and made other things too, I guess. But that thing, when it burned, you could see it from everywhere. It really burned. That's the biggest fire I remember in Tryon. Although I think Holland was in the theater too. We were in the Tryon Theater when it burned. So the flickering on the screen, and everybody wondered what was going on. Anyway, we all walked out very orderly, but anyway, it ended up burning. And there were several years that the theater was held in other buildings around town. Yeah, that's enough for me.
I meant to tell you that everybody doesn't have to comment on every subject. It's just if you can think of something you would like to.
I've got something about Ian's.
All right.
With that question.
Closer out.
Anna did not mention Pinecrest Inn. And back in the 30s, the Tryon Chamber of Commerce and the Pinecrest Inn, which was Charlie Lynch and Carter Brown, worked closely together. Whenever a letter came to the Chamber of Commerce or to Pinecrest, they would analyze the probable antecedents of these people and see whether or not they were worth replying to. But Pinecrest Inn was at one time a tuberculosis sanitarium, and Carter Brown remodeled it into a hotel, and of course his house is a legend around here. But I think one thing that people don't know is that these ubiquitous can lights, like are over our heads, you see them everywhere now. You can't imagine a building without them. When Carter was remodeling that hospital into an inn, he took number 10 grapefruit juice cans and put them up in the ceiling and put an ordinary porcelain socket with a light bulb in it. So I think he really could have been said to have invented canned lights. And he did one other thing that I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Wainwright would mind being mentioned. He didn't like this plain, smooth plaster business. This was before sheetrock. So he mixed plaster and went down to the stables where there were 50 horses at Pinecrest Inn, and shoveled up straw and dung and mixed it in with plaster. And the next time you go to Pinecrest Inn, look at the plaster and you will see it.
Okay. Of course, there are lots of other smaller inns. The Old Bears, for instance, on Melrose Avenue, and then Thousand Pines and Mimosa. And so there were not a dearth of places to stay. But the big place, of course, was Oak Hall, because that's where it was probably the largest area for a gathering, and that's where the horse show balls were, and complete with band and dress up, and you were lucky if you had a date to go to that.
Away from the ends, I think several places that's still in place in Tryon now. I can remember more than anything else, and that's the school that's still there, that was the elementary school and the high school at that time. The railroad, Lake Lanier, Harmon Field, and maybe another one too. They're still intact. The railroad played more part of Tryon than any other thing. We had 4 passenger trains that would come in every day, a number of freight trains. People would flock around to watch people get off and get on the train. Main Street would be black with smoke sometimes because the wind was just right. There would be black smoke up Main Street, lots of steam, and people would get on and off the train, and I always thought that I wanted to be a conductor. The train would pull up, and the conductor was the first one to get off. He would wipe the rails from the sudden coal smoke, put out a little stool for you to step on, and then help people off the train. Tryon has always been a unique place. The people were better dressed, more educated, and lived better than any other part in Polk County or Landry. You could walk down Trade Street in Tryon, go down to Landry, and you think you was in a foreign country. The people were dressed different, and the way of life was different. Why? Because Landry was a farming town. It was made up of farmers, peach growers, and farmers. Tryon was unique, and we have a tendency to call them Yankees. Most of them were from the north, but they were retired people. They had money. You didn't know it, though. A lot of them would just act like any Tom, Dick, and Harry. And they loved the local people. They loved Tryon, and that's what made Tryon. And there were several men in my life that influenced my life, and I think made up Tryon too. And that was the number one was our school superintendent, W.H. Slatter, Marcus Correll, who taught school, and Mr. Schlatter was not only the school superintendent, he taught 2 classes, helped coach sports, was scoutmaster, and various other things. And then there was George Taylor, who formed the Boys Club in Tryon. He too was from the north, and he saw that there was a need for children, boys especially, to have something to do in the summertime. So he formed the Boys Club. And then there was Seth, Nelson Jackson, R.H. Brady. We had a lot of men that spent a lot of time with children. And that is something that Tryon had, was children. They would come from down in the old southern musterized villages, families, where they'd have 5 or 6 going to school. And they usually be in groups. The older children taking care of the smaller children. They had no buses, you walked. Everywhere you went, you walked. The children, I guess probably at one time we had about as many children as they have now in the elementary school over there. And lots of children. Things to do, play with, nothing to play, no television, just play. Play marbles, wrestle, hopscotch, whatever, you know. And I'm taking that too.
That's okay. Thank you,
Harold brought back some memories here. Harold and Jim and I were all in the same class. I believe about 78, wasn't it? and Holland out there.
I know better.
And Louise was a grade behind. But when we were in the 7th grade,
Louise was in a good place.
yeah. When we were in the 7th grade, he's talking about Mr. Schlatter. When he walked down the hall and misbehaving, he went like this. Chills went up your back. I wasn't even talking back to that man. Best thing to say yes, sir, and go on. Our teacher left the room, and everybody was starting giggling, laughing, whatever. But when he came by, he called Jim. And Jim's dad at that time was chairman of the school board. And so he says, "Come on up here, Jim." And Jim was scared to death, as any of us would have been. He says, "Get your hat and go home." In those days, being sent home was about the worst thing that could happen to you, because your mom and daddy gave it to you when you got home. And Jim just stood there, and Mr. Schlatter said, "Didn't you hear me, Jim? I said, get your hat and go home." And Jim says, "I don't have a hat." Then the whole class Laughed, he said, all right, go back and sit down and behave.
I don't know how they knew what my next subject was, but that was my next subject, to talk about someone, a person that stands out in their memory. And I was going to start by mentioning Miss Myrtle Baldwin, who taught many, many, many generations of students at the high school, history and French and Latin. And she was known to keep people after school if you didn't behave, detention slips. And I got one once in a while. I'm telling on myself, Mom. There was a person in the class, and I'm not going to mention the name because he's not on this panel. I'm not trying to tell anybody. That got them all the time. I'll call him John. And and she kept them. She never forgot if you had detention. And this John graduated, and the next fall he was there to help his uncle around the school. They were doing some plumbing or something, and he ran into Miss Baldwin on the sidewalk, and she said, "John, you owe me 4 detentions." Does anyone else want to talk about some person that you remember, person that...
Well, of course, we've all got stories about Mr. Jr.Anna because he was a little bit of everything. He'd been in World War I and came out as a major or something, and so he knew all about discipline and how to lead. And he was telling us a story one time about his war experiences. He was a very ardent Presbyterian, as I recall, and he was, I think, trying to tell us about predestination. And he said he was in a battle, and over here one was falling and being killed, and over on the other side somebody else was falling and being killed. And he says, "So what was that?" And some wiseacre in the back says, "Well, that was the Germans' hard luck." Anyway, he was a very special man, and of course we all had Miss Baldwin. I feel like I'm in a senior in the freshman class here. I was in school quite a bit before these kids. Sure. But we had, there was no school bell, as I recall. We had a nice black man, Dave, who came out with a handbell to ring when you were supposed to be in the morning and when you were supposed to be in after exercise or something. But he was awfully good about if he saw some stragglers, he'd be just a little bit late with that bell. He'd look down the hill to see how many, that he could wait